You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, because you're worth it. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we have been watching A Matter of Perspective. It was written by Ed Zuckerman and directed by Cliff Bole. James, what happens in this one?
Star Trek The Next Generation does Rashomon via the holodeck, after Riker is accused of blowing up a space station and murdering the lead scientist. Is he a fine officer just doing his job, or is he a vengeful lothario driven by petty jealousies? Maybe he's both, but it will all be solved in the end through some ridiculous technobabble that's causing holes on the Enterprise.
Well, Alex, you'd never seen this episode before this viewing. What did you think of it?
Well, maybe it's just me, or maybe it's because I fell over this morning and smashed my head against the curb, but the thing this episode reminds me of more than anything else is a Jacob's cream cracker.
Right. Delicious with cheese?
Well, just in as much as it's very dry, but it's still quite enjoyable. And, you know, I'd be willing to see how many I can fit in my mouth in one time. I'm not really sure what I mean by this, but I could really go for some cheese at the moment.
I guess it's vaguely high concept, as James mentioned. Rashomon telling the same story from different points of view. I think they probably could have gone further with that. Maybe more than the two and the one little snippet and the one hypothetical bit in there, but yeah, it's quite neat storytelling, I guess.
I think it's sort of overall, it's sort of quite concise. It does what it's trying to do. Where it perhaps falls down is that there's some slight logical flaws to the way it's presenting what it is, and yeah, just at times, as any courtroom thing can be, as I say, it's a little bit dry. But it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination at all. You know, I'm pretty engaged watching it.
Let's start with the teaser, I guess, because I like this very much, because the most Star Trek Next Generation thing of all. Hey, they're painting. You know, it's not often you see a naked bottom on Star Trek Next Generation. What a trait. But all these people are painting the same thing, but have a different perspective on that thing. Isn't I hate to call a woman a thing, by the way. They're all painting her anyway, but you know, it's quite on the nose. But again, I didn't really notice that until someone else pointed it out to me.
I mean, certainly whatever I was expecting to see at the start of the episode, a life modelling class was not it. And it certainly made me go, well, what the bloody hell's going on this week? It's played for the joke, isn't it? I mean, that's essentially why it's there, is just to have the joke.
I think that's quite good fun, with Data basically being highly critical. He clearly has a connoisseur chip, which seems to have influenced some other joke somewhere. But yeah, it is played for the joke. It's quite a funny joke, and that's fine to get some light relief before a murder takes place. or not a murder, what could it be?
They do seem to be reversing the positions on Picard criticising Data's acting earlier. Now we have Data trying his best not to criticise Picard's art.
I did wonder at one point if they were going for a second joke, which is that he walks past the model and just sort of glances and goes, and just carries on walking. And I couldn't decide whether that was that they were playing up of, he doesn't have any feelings one way or the other about the naked woman in front of him, or if it was just me being pervy. And sadly, I think it's probably the latter, but
in the future, people don't perv on naked women in life drawing classes.
No, they go to the holodeck and wank over them.
I was just about to say, they have no issues. They just whack it out then and there. Splash it onto the canvas.
You see, they could only do this when Riker was on a completely different ship.
It's so unusual, the circumstances that the Enterprise leaves a couple of crew members somewhere and then goes off and does something else, and then there's no way to verify what happens. And in some ways, the actual scenario, how events really played out, is never actually properly established, which is good in some ways, but also puts some doubt in your mind about how much you actually like one of your leading characters. So I suppose getting to the main plot, we have a space station that explodes, and that's quite exciting. It just exploded, sir, which is one of the best line readings ever. Very dramatic. You really feel the tension and the sadness that a space station has exploded from Cole Meany there. He really nails it. But luckily it seems you can transport after a station's exploded, so that's lucky.
Well, all the matter is still there. You've just got to piece it all back together.
R for Riker.
I have to admit, when they did end up on that space station, I did turn to my wife and immediately say, so what kind of game are you looking for this week? Would it be a mystery game or a physical game?
I made this note also. I said it looks like an 80s UK sci-fi set. It looks like, a space station the crew of Blake 7 might end up on.
I mean, in some respects, we have sort of fallen into that crystal maze end of things in each week. What kind of episode are we getting this week? Will it be a mystery episode? Yes, it will. Will it be a physical episode in the sense that there'll be Troy physically engaging in the act of feet rubbing or whatever it is this week that she's into? Oh, it's the mystery episode.
Yeah, we seem to get mysteries quite a lot. I hadn't noticed until this rewatch that actually there's quite often a whodunit. Often completely incompetently handled. But this time, yes, there is doubt, because essentially Riker is acting incredibly guilty throughout this episode.
Well, I'm also intrigued by the episode. I never really feel like I got a satisfactory answer to it. The episode starts and you have Geordi and Worf come back, and essentially Geordi's there going, and Picard going, What is it, Geordi? Well, Captain, just ask Riker. He'll tell you everything that happened. And I never really get the sense by the end of the episode as to how much of an insight that those two actually have as to what's happened, or why they have that insight.
Yes, they're never around at any of the key events portrayed in this episode, nor do they tell their story about maybe some other things that they might have seen that maybe provided clues as to what was actually going on.
I mean, and they are at least around when we start the holodeck evidence, and that's one of the parts where the evidence is most in contention. Is Riker coming on strong? Is she coming on strong? And yet, Geordi's evidence is never asked for.
Yeah, I think...
Well, it could possibly be that Geordi didn't see anything because he's blind.
Imagine Geordi recreating something in the holodeck and it would just all be interference and waves. And just, well, this is exactly how I saw it.
Geordi, have you been taking drugs again?
But it's quite nice. They all sit down in the holodeck. They've got some nice tables and chairs going on there. And then here's Riker's version of events, where he is the most professional man in the world. He isn't very friendly, all down to business. And you instantly go, well, this did not happen. This is not the personality of Riker. He is more friendly than that. He's got a bigger personality than that. He's not just, let's get down to business, let's do that. So instantly you are doubting him, because really that's not the character we know. So it seems his evidence is sort of shifted towards him being uber professional, when that just clearly is not the case.
But in a way, I like that because that's Riker recreating it as best he can to show that he's innocent. And I never at any point in this doubt that he's innocent. I know you probably should. And I know the episode is built around the idea that you should sometimes at least have a little bit of doubt that Riker could be guilty, even though he's a main character, so clearly he isn't. But I never have any doubt that he is innocent. So seeing him almost have to twist a little bit is quite nice.
I think the uncomfortable thing is that while at no point do you ever think that he's a murderer, you are sort of constantly being asked to question just how close to a rapist is he.
Yes, I kind of want to get to that in some ways. I mean, I don't know if this is Riker being deceptive or if this is how he sees himself. This is how he believes he acts.
They were asking for it. Well, thank you, Will. That's really good evidence, but I'd rather that we kept it in your mind, to be honest.
His evidence suggests it was quite boring. There was an agitated scientist and there was a woman who insisted he stayed on the station and she touched the panel to make the door close. And then we come to her evidence. And it's a bit different. Riker is more like Riker. He's a bit friendly, a little bit winky. He's a winker. And we get to the scene in the quarters, and he's basically coming on to her to the point where she's uncomfortable. And then it seems there is an attempted rape. And we go to Troy, our engine of truth, who says, no, that's what she thinks happened. She thinks you tried to rape her. She's definitely telling the truth.
Now, I mean, this is getting to the heart of what I think is the logical inconsistency in the episode. Is that both of those versions of events are quite extreme opposites. Now, if it was on an inflection of the way that something is said, then I could believe that two people would have very different interpretations. But I mean, he is quite literally forcing himself on her while she's saying no in one version, while in the other she isn't. And I just feel that there's a bit too much of a gap in between those for the idea that they both believe that is definitely what happened. And they're not lying about any of those events to be believable.
Is this episode simply an interpretation of white male privilege?
Do you have to go and poke Tumblr?
The idea that they're trying to get at is that she sees these events as like this, and he sees them as like that. And they've got to exaggerate it, because the audience can be quite dumb at times. And it's unfortunate to say that. It really is. And it's unfortunate that they have to go to extreme lengths to make the point. And I think it does kind of ruin the episode that they have to go to these extreme lengths, because there was a better way of doing it, making it a lot more subtle. But if you make it subtle, it goes over a lot of people's heads.
You know what? I could almost go with the lengths that they've gone to, though, if there was some examination of what that means for the way that the rest of the crew look on Riker. Specifically, actually, Troy. What I think I would like to see, if you're going to go down this path, what I would have liked to have seen is Riker saying, well, that's clearly not what happened, and Troy saying, but she's telling the truth, and her sort of almost being quite concerned about the possibility that Riker is verging on such questionable behaviour.
I think I'm fine with it going to extremes and everyone seeing things completely differently. That's fine. I don't mind that. Definitely would have liked to see more of that. I think Geordi's evidence being presented would have been good. But I don't feel this particular altercation. He's not on trial for rape. He's not on trial for how he responds to her. And actually at the end that goes completely unresolved, essentially. And didn't he? We never know. And so to evoke something like that so extreme, which isn't the key to the trial, seems completely wrong to me. It's not relevant enough. And if you're going to do an episode about that, do an episode about that. To have it as an incidental detail, and not just from our point of view, they actually throw in the word rape for the first time since Tasha Yar's been on the ship.
God, I'd forgotten about that.
I feel that it's not something that should be so lightly thrown around as a minor plot point.
But you see, they don't have issues such as rape in the future. It's the future. Everything's nice and happy and lovely.
I mean, there is an element by the end of the episode. Is he? As you're right. Is he a predator? Isn't he a predator? Who cares? He's not a murderer.
I guess the thing is, in that event, you don't think that is Riker's character, really, from what we know of him. Yes, he is a ladies' man, but I don't think he's a bad guy. Oh, damn, I sound like I'm defending him now. That aside, in that particular scenario, it doesn't seem like he's massively in character. And you have this grieving widow, I suppose, as well, so I don't want to discount anyone's point of view, but I think that's why you need more perspectives throughout this episode, just to establish which set of events is more extreme in some ways.
I think you're definitely onto something, because a good middle ground would have been to... Riker's evidence is a little bit too close to just what we would normally see with the character. Now, there's elements of his character also in the other evidence, but the most believable by far in terms of what we've seen before is Riker's own chain of events. If you were to incorporate a little more doubt into his chain of events, so there's some suggestions of potential wrongdoing, it would definitely make it a little bit more tense and questionable. Because otherwise what you end up with is when she gives her evidence, it's kind of like seeing a 1940s, 1950s film that gets shown on BBC Two on a Sunday afternoon with some sort of delicate waif-like female character who's being imposed upon by this man, but never mind, oh, he is such a good fellow, all this sort of stuff. It makes her evidence all too easy to dismiss when we should be questioning, well, maybe it's true.
I think there is an issue from our perspective, certainly from my perspective, to easily dismiss her evidence, because certainly from my perspective as a Star Trek fan, I've been a Star Trek fan for a long time, I have an emotional connection to Riker. I know he wouldn't do what she's saying he's doing. But at the same time, you look at Riker's defense, and he's putting himself out of character in his defense. So you understand that there's a middle ground. There has to be a middle ground between their two stories. And I think if they were braver, maybe that could have been the story. That, it's his word against hers. Both can be wrong. Both can be, as the title says, a matter of perspective. And we need to understand the middle ground. In that sense, you could have dispensed away with the whole murder side of it completely and had it about him trying to, well, I wouldn't say rape, but sexually assault her, which is kind of the same thing, I guess. But they probably could not have done that in 1990.
I have a feeling as well that when Star Trek comes back with that online series, probably still not going to be a plot at that point either. It'd be a bold series opener.
We're talking about this, but Riker is on trial for shooting a man and blowing up a space station accidentally. And we know he wouldn't do that. That's completely out of character. But the rest is sort of up for grabs, and maybe it's a failure of the writing that we're focusing on this, or maybe it's our modern perspective on it.
You see, I have to disagree with that as well. I think Riker understands the concept of consent. Basically, I can't see Riker, even though he is a ladies' man. He's, and I don't want to sound all season 1 moralizing, but he's a Starfleet officer. He is always portrayed as a good man, and I don't want to seem like I'm trying to justify his actions, but I don't think that the character as written up to this point was basically a rapist.
No.
And I don't think that was in his capacity.
No. It's a very difficult subject to sort of convey what you mean. But Riker's sort of been portrayed as someone who'll kiss someone in an inappropriate circumstance. But then, in the language of television, I suppose you can also argue that a television kiss is significant of more quite often.
Yes.
But to move on to less politically questionable ground, the evidence that's most amusing is the third portrayal of events, where Riker is essentially portrayed as coming in and them saying, "I'm not sure how I feel about you turning up early. We really weren't expecting this." And Riker turns around to all intents and purposes and says, "Fuck you, we're Starfleet," before beating everyone up in sight.
I'm inclined to believe that is the true series of events.
They've painted themselves into a corner because the whole incident between Riker and Mrs. Apgar obviously is only seen by them. And then you've got this other perspective, which is, the second third-hand account from the assistant. And, it's sort of comedically played in some ways, where Riker gets beaten up by the old man.
If her evidence is barely admissible, why not Geordie's?
You're a dead man, Apgar. A dead man. Great.
How did she come to know that this had happened?
Well, that he supposedly told her.
Because the way that events are presented, for Geordie to have found out that things were going south, not a euphemism, and for her to find out that apparently Riker had shouted that, there'd have to have been some time between scenes, but it's not really portrayed as there being any particular time. Or maybe I'm just being harsh, I don't know.
Well, the thing is, she and his wife, he sends them down to the planet, obviously because he's planning on murdering Riker, but that does cast a bit of doubt. Why would they not be there? The other bit of evidence, which is the hypothetical, Riker beaming out and then shooting the scientist. Did anyone feel that was kind of unnecessary to show? I think after he explained it verbally, I understood what somebody shooting a man looked like.
Yes. Well, it's all there just for the dramatic effect, isn't it?
He didn't shoot the man, he shot the device.
Yeah. That's what I propose happened. It's quite a risky strategy for murder, isn't it?
Yes, in an approach to murder, it's kind of the Rube Goldberg end of things, really. I can't kill you directly, so I'm going to shoot this and hope a chain reaction sets off.
Shall we move on to the slightly odd, not quite a B-plot, technobabble?
Yes, so back to Geordie, Wesley, and Data in search of glory holes.
So these holes are appearing every X number of identical hours, and that leads to these deductions, which Picard then goes through in court, which are so mind-numbingly dull and infuriating almost, because I don't want a science explanation to solve this trial especially. It just seems it's a bit too much of a Star Trek solution to the episode, which is more based on character than anything else.
It does create sort of very smug air towards the end with the fascinating theory, if could be proved true, but it can't. Well, actually it can. Oh, you smart ass.
The fact that the holodeck functions as the machine really bothered me quite significantly. Because it wouldn't, because it's not in the same place, and it isn't the machine. Even if they say, actually, it's just a complex series of mirrors, and I'm like, is that all you need to generate this brand new source of energy, is it?
If it's replicating the explosion of the ship, when the ship has exploded, why would it not then replicate the space outside, rather than just acting as if an explosion had happened that had stripped all of the walls of everything that was on them?
Why does the holographic explosion only explode holograms if it is in fact fully functional? Why do they not all get blown to smithereens? Because the holodeck wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah, they have the safety protocols on.
Of course. But are we not talking about chemical or wave reaction which is actually outside of the parameters of the holodeck as well? Is this not actually something physical happening in space rather than a holographic replication of it?
Well, it's a holographic replication of what would happen in those events. This actually comes up in a Voyager episode, I seem to remember. They are testing... I think it's in the episode Threshold.
I bet you like it, don't you?
I love the bit where Janeway and Tom Paris have salamander babies. I just love that bit. I seem to remember there's a section in that episode where they're on the holodeck testing out this new device, but they can only then test it out in reality because the holodeck's essentially testing facility only goes so far.
I just find it all a little bit convenient, and of course it is, because they've got so much time to wrap up a television episode, but it is that smug, well, we know this is going to happen, and this happens, and there you go, we all get off with it.
And then you have them all happy and smiling at the end, even though somebody has died.
He wasn't a very nice man, it seems, but all he wanted was the love and affection of his wife.
And weapons to kill millions.
Exactly.
Who wouldn't want to have the love of their wife whilst also having in their hand the power to kill many, many generations?
I feel maybe the Federation has to incentivize its scientists a bit more. You can do all this hard work, and in return, you can stay exactly as you are on this tiny space station with 2 other people for the rest of your life. There you go.
Yes, it's sort of the intergalactic version of a fruit picker.
Indeed. Well, I don't have anything more to say about this episode. Anyone?
No, neither do I, but it's never stopped us going to quickfire.
Quickfire.
I just want to take a minute to talk about that table and the chairs in the holodeck.
Do you know, I thought you might.
Because I'm willing to go with the explosion has destroyed everything on the holodeck. It's bloody stupid, but we'll go with it. But it doesn't destroy the chairs and table. So they're not generated by the holodeck.
No, they are generated by the holodeck, but the holodeck understands the difference between the prediction of what would happen and the people all sitting on tables and chairs. I think the holodeck is smarter than you're giving it credit.
If the holodeck was that smart, it would replicate the space outside after the explosion has happened. I get the sense that they have just literally walked a table and a few chairs into the holodeck. These people are morons.
Would you think it's better if the space station projection exploded on the holodeck and they all just fell off their chairs?
Be a laugh, wouldn't it?
That's what this episode needed, a nice bit of slapstick right at the end.
The model used for Dr. Apgar's science station is a reuse of the Regula 1 from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which was actually, a model from the motion picture, but it's not relevant. It'd be used again in Deep Space Nine. I'm glad these models are just lying around for 20 years. That makes me happy.
Ira Stephen Bear said, "This is the only episode of television in which the writer begged them to fire him so that he didn't have to do a second draft, as they offered a litany of notes on the episode, but they were so behind and they were so caked under with work, they had to refuse him."
I find it so strange. Both Ron Moore and Ira Bear reckon this is the worst episode of season 3. It clearly isn't. Whereas Michael Piller said probably the hardest story to break. It was a technical nightmare for the director. I was very, very happy with the script and I thought the show was disappointing. I guess it didn't translate properly. I agree with that. I think there's probably a better episode in there, but the script needs a little bit of work. But it's not bad. It's just a bit middling.
Yeah, but Michael Pillar's opinions on this episode are a little bit off, because he then goes on to say that that's about the best murder mystery I've been involved in developing in my career. Alright, we can assume that maybe he wasn't involved in many, but then he goes on to say it ought to win an Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Mystery of the Year. I mean, that's outright delusional.
Krieger waves are named after scientific consultant David Krieger.
I mean, through this recording, we've discussed some of the problems of ethics in this and potential hints at something uncomfortably close to rape at points. And it's nice to know that those thoughts were also considered by the writing staff. Ronald D. Moore does say, my first assignment on staff as story editor was to help gangbang the freelance script A Matter of Perspective, and none of us took credit on it.
Now, they do actually acknowledge that that comment on the commentary to yesterday's Enterprise. They also reference gangbanging the script on yesterday's Enterprise, but preface it with, it was the 90s. That's their excuse for using that phrase.
Well, that wraps up another episode from my perspective. We'll be back again where we'll be talking about yesterday's Enterprise. We're all looking forward to that. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.